Welcome to the very first episode of the Teaching That Counts podcast. My name is Abel Maestas, and I am a math instructional coach in Ceres, California. I'm super excited to be hosting this brand new podcast that really is just about having conversations with people about teaching and learning math. Most of the time, we'll be talking in the secondary level, but sometimes we'll have guests that will be talking elementary math as well. We'll talk with coaches, teachers, administrators, and even some students about teaching and learning math. So in this first episode, I welcome a group of teachers and administrators in a conversation as we begin digging into the book Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics by Peter Liljedahl. I hope you enjoy this first podcast, and I hope you enjoy listening and learning with us as we explore this book. Here you go. Here's our first podcast in Teaching That Counts. Well, thanks for joining us today as we start our journey through Building Thinking Classrooms, looking at Peter Liljedahl's book, Building Thinking Classroom in the Mathematics, grades K-12. We're here today joined by some teachers and admin, and so I'm going to let everybody kind of go around the room and introduce themselves. So first, I'm Abel Maestas. I'm an instructional coach here at the Ceres Unified School District.
And I'm Grant McCormick. I teach math at Central Valley High School.
I'm Susanna Candiel. I'm one of the assistant principals at Central Valley High School.
I'm Sarah Mucha, and I'm a math teacher at Central Valley High School.
And I'm Brian Wise. I'm a district education technology specialist. And once upon a time, I taught math a little bit.
Okay.
Mostly science, but a little bit of math.
And I am Mariana Sandoval, and I'm a district ed tech as well.
I'm Diana Andrade, and I'm a math teacher at Argus High.
My name is Soros Delgado. I teach at Ceres High School. I teach Integrated Math 1 and Computer Science.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody, for coming and being part of this book study. Today, we're just looking at the introduction, and we're going to just have an open conversation about how things went, how it's looking, and then kind of where are we going with the book and where we see this is happening in our classrooms and in for our district as a whole. So we'll just kind of start off an open conversation. We're looking at today just the introduction and just kind of the first question, just kind of what stood out to you guys in the intro.
I liked this list of the types of students because I was reading it and I was also cringing because I could see some of my own students being 1 through 5. So, but I think Grant and I were also talking about he really enjoyed the pie chart here of the breakdown of how many students were mimicking, how many were faking, stalling, actually trying it, or slacking.
Yeah, when I saw the pie chart, it was just interesting that that's exactly how I would probably put the breakdown in my own classroom, and how universal it seems that really is, and how that's the result of the systematic norms that we have in math education.
Yeah, I think the thing that I was kind of cringing about was that the kids are always so busy, but they're not thinking. And I was thinking about when I was in classroom, because I was a math teacher as well, and just a lot of the conversation that he starts off with, how structured our classrooms are, and my kids were always, when you walked in, oh, they're so productive, they're doing so much, but it's all just very rote, and they're not learning anything, and they're not actually thinking. And I was just oh boy, it made me think of have you ever driven somewhere, you're you're spaced out, and you're oh, how did I get here? It's all just kind of, I know what I'm doing, I'm getting there, but none of it is actually any kind of thinking. So that was really insightful. Oh boy, we've created this monster.
Yeah, and I'm such a numbers guy, so I see 20%, 80%, and all these things. And what I was fascinated in that same area where you have those 5 types of students is that 20% of the class, when we're doing the I do, we do, you do type, as he was talking about, the mimicking, the kids that we actually want to try, we want everyone to try it on their own, only 20% actually do that. The others fall in those other 4 categories. But bigger than that, what he saw that was troubling was that in a 1-hour lesson, 75 to 85% of students weren't thinking 100% of the time. And so I was like, wow, that's wild. So that was some other numbers that I thought, oof, wow, that's pretty striking.
And actual kids that were doing the thinking, only were thinking in like 8 to 12 minutes. So I'm like, wow, in the whole hour, that's meant the kids that were actually trying. So I thought that was also interesting.
I liked how he defined the student dean. You know what? Because and it's just like teaching, right? Because we know we have other things to do within that time period, whatever that time is, as do our students, right? They're 100% not there just to learn. Like they're there for the social aspect. They're there for, all those other things, the extracurricular activities, right? So thought that was good to also to be thinking about, we expect them to be there to learn, but they're also there for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah, how many of our students do we know that just show up to be with their friends?
Mm-hmm. It's a big
Like,
part.
come see my friends.
Big part of high school for sure.
Yeah. So, anybody else? Something that stood out to you? I mean, I think the first read through this, everything stood out to me. I was just like, whoa.
I did enjoy the antidote with the teacher in the beginning and how she reached out for help, but then at the end of the day, she really just wanted him to sit down and shut up. So
Just give me problems.
it was a little. It was funny. I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Something else that made sense was when he talks about like the systemic, how the norms that we've created for classrooms and how just changing furniture can change your mind. It's like changing, a mind shift. And I was briefly at a different district and they had flexible seating. And as a math teacher, when I walked in and I saw beanbag chairs and lawn furniture, I was like, what? I had a hard time wrapping my brain around it, but many of the teachers really they said it worked, like it was effective in terms of just getting kids, because I was always worried about how can kids do math problems? There's no desk, and where do they do this on? And how do you get them to focus on instruction? It's just like how the class structures are put in place. But I just thought it was interesting that every kid goes into the classroom and it all looks the same, so then they're all just kind of robotically just doing the same things. So a shift in something simple like that can change things.
Yeah, that reminds me so much of, when we look at the history of grading or the history of school, right? How a lot of school, the way it was set up was to get people ready for industry, to be working in factories, right? The bells ring because we have bells in schools because that's what happened in factories. We have students doing certain things because that's what we needed them to do in factories. That's not where we live. That's not how we live anymore. But it reminds me of that. It reminds me of we want uniformity within each of those classes because that's what's going to get them prepared for, in those cases, industry in factories. So that's kind of what that reminds me of. The one other thing that really, I guess, stood out to me, we talk about things that are research-based all the time, like, oh, this is research-based practice. This is research-based. Almost to the point that it just becomes something that admin or coaches or people just say. Like, this is research-based. But what I appreciated about this was that he talked about how this was 15 years of working with over 400 teachers in 2-week cycles and then 8-week cycles to see if it worked longitudinally. And we started with something. If that didn't work, we scrapped it. If it did work, then we went over a little bit more, and then we found those optimal ways. So it was a very action research-based approach. And so I think I'm very intrigued about the rest of the book because a lot of this came from 15 years of action research. So it's not so much theory. It was something that was found within practice. So that got me kind of excited in this. Was there anything that you think was that challenged your own thinking right now? Like you thought, wow, that's kind of not what we do.
The one
want to say it so much challenged my thinking, but I am curious to read on, like looking at the 14, like, you know, how we answer questions. And then also number 5, and then also number 9, how we use hints and extensions. I think that's going to be intriguing for me to learn more about and read more about.
I'm interested in number 11, how students take notes, because I feel like my students don't really know how to take notes. And so I've been trying a lot this year, doing like an actual notebook under the document camera, trying to model how to do note taking, because I feel like that's a skill that they're lacking, and they're going to need that for college, because the professor will not wait for you to copy down what you need to copy down. They just keep going. So I think that will be interesting. Also the homework, what homework looks like. I think it might look a little bit different than just a problem set.
Yeah.
So.
I wouldn't say that it's reading a lot of things that have challenged my thinking yet, but I'm interested in seeing how my thinking will be challenged by these things.
Absolutely.
Especially like looking at the norms, right? Or like the whatever the norm was, and then like doing the complete opposite. You know, like throwing out the furniture.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Just kids sit and you stand like they stand.
right.
That being said, it'd be interesting, you know, to see how these, you know, within these factors, some of the practices line up with our own CUSD norms, right? And how they might reflect their framework. But I think I kind of know how they reflect the framework, because we can see that within, you know, the context and the feedback and the content. But norms is the other, like we talk a lot about CUSD norms, but how do these either reflect or challenge those? I'm very interested in knowing about that.
Yeah, I know for me, a lot of the secondary sites in our school district have been working on clarity from one perspective or another. For example, a lot of staffs, a lot of teachers are reflecting now on how they write their learning intentions, success criteria. Are the students playing any role in writing those and deciding how the learning is measured and how the learning is demonstrated? So I'm kind of looking, you know, seeing if that will line up at all with what's going to be in the book. To be honest, I didn't really read it before we met just now. I've been skimming through it as you guys have been talking. I didn't do my homework, sorry. But that's kind of in my mind. And then we've been having these conversations about grading across the board, K-12, for the last probably 2.5 years. So I'm wondering if grading practices, I don't see grading listed explicitly in these. Oh yeah, it is number 14. Yay, number 14. There it is. I just didn't get that far on the list. There it is. Okay, so obviously that's going to resonate a lot with some of the conversations we've been having. That's part of our role as ed tech specialists. We support people with their gradebook design and Infinite Campus settings, and we are well aware of the limitations that Infinite Campus has when you're trying to do standards-based grading. So I'm curious if that's gonna come up in the discussion around this book too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what is in the book, just because I love the classroom, and we were, you know, in our district we have been to recent very DI, very I do, we do, you do. So a lot of this was like, oh my gosh, this is just, for me, we're really good at that, like our teachers are, and so I can, as an administrator, I know our teachers want to, you know, do different and they want to do better, but how do we help them do better? Like that's my struggle, is kind of I'm right alongside them. Like I don't know how to, you know, this is hard. It does seem difficult and challenging. But anyhow, so I'm curious to see that, and just in kind of what Brian was talking about, like our success criteria and our learning intentions just being more clear. That might help support the students, and you know, like our stallers, our fakers, our mimickers, like so that they could kind of guide themselves. Like, instead of sitting there waiting for the teacher to give you an answer, which, the scholar and the faker does, because that's what they're used to, then kids, if they have clarity, then they will be able to guide themselves. Like, if I'm successful, if I can X, Y, Z, so I can do X, and I'm not quite at Y, and so I feel like that aligns with what our district is kind of leaning towards. So I'm excited to see how the book is going to, give us some insights to do that.
I'm looking forward to this because I want to learn about showing grit for my students and see if this book kind of brings it out of them.
Yeah, so that brings up another point here is like, in building a thinking classroom, does that also provide students opportunities for building grit? Grit can be a lot of things. The best definition I've heard of grit in the last few years actually just came a couple of weeks ago when I was at the NCTM conference. And the presenter said, grit is what do you do when you get stuck? That's the definition.
And what do you do when you don't know what to do?
Right. Yeah, what do you do when you don't know what to do?
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get through that?
And then I'm glad Susanna mentioned the I do, we do, you do, which was how we were all probably taught to teach in this district, especially in the last 10 to 12 years. We have a new supplemental curriculum. It's illustrative math, and then what is that the same thing at high school, or does it have a different name?
Open.
And from what I've heard, that logic is kind of turned backwards now. For in some respects, your lesson starts with a you do, then we move to a we do, and then to an I do. So you flip that, and that to me has the potential of building what you're calling grit. Because you're inducing this little bit of a struggle because you're giving the students something to solve and something to figure out without giving them a lot of guidance at the beginning, and then you're kind of assessing where they are. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's when I taught science back in the Stone Age when I started my career. That was kind of how we were taught to teach. So I think things have kind of come around a little bit full circle about that. But I am curious what that looks like. Because that can really go south on you too. If you give them all the components and then nobody knows what to do and they all just shrug their shoulders and say, now what? Then what do you do?
Which I feel like that's kind of what happened to the teacher in the beginning of this introduction, right? It was like, I don't know what to do, and then they kind of gave up the third time. I'm hoping that throughout this book he gives us those micro moves and macro moves that he talks about that will help in implementing that kind of a format. Yeah. So what he did was with these factors, they looked at practices that were ideal or optimal for these 14 practices, which they felt were the 14 like unique teaching practices that really encompassed everything that the students needed or everything that the teachers do in the classroom.
So then each chapter is going to be a focus on that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, each chapter is a focus. As we move forward, we've taken some notes. So Mariana is going to keep notes. We'll share with everyone, and then they can take a look at those summaries of some of the things we talked about and some of the things we see. One thing in here that was of particular interest to me is at the very end when he says how to read this book. There are a couple things that are pretty good. The FAQs at the end of the chapters, I think, are pretty are going to be pretty great for kind of synthesizing how it works in our own classrooms. The questions to think about, I think we'll be using some of those questions in our discussions. And then the key point here, though, kind of moving on for our next time, he does suggest that you read chapters 1 through 3 and then implement all 3 of those optimal practices for thinking together. I had an opportunity to go to one of his sessions. I think you were there too, right? At NCTM. And he does recommend that those first 3 all go together right away, all at the same time. So I'm thinking that for next time, we do kind of a 1 to 3 block before we go into each of the other ones. And then we meet and we just talk about 1, 2, and 3 and how how you feel about implementing those 3 things in your classroom.
That sounds good.
Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that session at NCTM, one of the things that stood out to me was that how do we make change? We overwhelm the system with big changes, not with small changes. And so, and reading about how, like, taking the furniture out, how that creates such a substantial change in the environment so that you can establish it what you want it to be and challenge what students' home state is and get them into what you want them to. So overwhelm the system with big changes.
Yeah, which is kind of counterintuitive to, especially to the way that we've normally done things. We said, okay, well, let's start small. And what he says is, no. You need to make big change at first to change, to like really, how did he put it? To really like break the system, challenge the system.
Do the opposite of what isn't working.
Yeah.
Do the extreme opposite.
Yeah. And I don't think for this part we're really doing extreme opposite because, there's a lot. I mean, you guys are all doing a lot of great things in your classroom that already are part of this. So one of the things also in that last part he says is all of your teacherly craft is still relevant and necessary to make each of these optimal practices work in your classroom. So by no means is saying, hey, look, here you go. You must do everything. It's like these are the practices. Now, how do you interweave them with your own style, with your own practice, with the way that you instruct, and how can you build those within your own classroom? Because your craft is still important and relevant. So I really love that piece. So as we move on and we talk more about the book and we talk about each of these chapters, really kind of reflect on, okay, how does what I bring to the table integrate with what he's talking about in each of those? Cool. Just to hear from everyone, real quick, kind of what are your big takeaways looking forward, and then we'll pretty much end it there. It's a short one today because we were just looking at the introduction.
So can I mention something, Abel?
Yes.
So in these notes that I'm putting together, these I'll share it with you guys too, so you can add your own things in there too, or pull from. We'll make it interactive. I'm not the only one that has to take the notes too. If you guys want to add something in there, but one of the things that I have is like challenge yourself. Like, what is something that maybe from the book that you want to like try or start moving towards? And there's like a little checklist of items, so we can make notes of that too. And then when we come back to meet together, just to kind of see, like, I tried this, or I started talking about this conversation, or whatever the case may be, to make those little small moves just to start off. And if you're doing a big move, then great. Like, what came out of that? So I think those are useful too. Like hearing about that. I know in past like book studies that I've been a part of, that has always been interesting to hear and see. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. But
I think that's great.
Challenges section.
Yeah, I think that's good as we get into the book.
Sure.
The challenges section, or what's something I'm going to do right away, or something I could do in my classroom. Because we just looked at the introduction, I think right now we're just thinking, what is something we're looking forward to?
For me personally, the 14 practices there, it's number 8. How do we foster student autonomy? I'm someone that likes to have control in my classroom, and I would really love it if students would take on some of that for themselves. And how do I make that happen?
Yeah.
I would like to add to that. For me, when I was looking at the practices, is my room. I feel like I have a very unique room already because I have groups, but everything's against the walls. Now I want students to actually stand up and do work. Mm-hmm. So now how can I move my furniture around so they can get up, do the work, and collaborate as a team, and not just talk around the table, because I know it's not the same.
Same. I've been sitting here thinking, what if I took out all my desks and those kids walked in just to see their faces, right? Because like today both of my classes did group work, and boy, it's hard to get them to move. Once they sit down and they find their home, it's like, oh, get up, So it's like, oh, what if I just didn't even have an option for them to sit anywhere?
Yeah.
As an administrator at Central Valley, I'm lucky that Sarah and Grant are both here, because I'm looking forward to going into their classrooms.
Oh no!
And just kind of learning alongside them, because I feel like again, my biggest challenge is how to support teachers, and so I'm lucky that these guys are willing to do the work, and just looking forward at the next 3 chapters. One of them is just like, what kind of tasks are you going to give them, and like, how do you put your groups together, and how do your kids do the work? And I knew that they already have their structure of their classroom is already not as traditional as most classrooms in our district, in the sense that you guys already have groups and things, but I'm just kind of curious and excited to see what you guys are going to come through with.
Yeah,
No pressure.
No, I mean,
No pressure,
I used
really,
to work
honestly,
with
no
them,
pressure.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, I do work with them, but I was a math teacher with them, so.
and our mentor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, But yeah, I'm also looking forward to the collaborative groups part, because I do have groups, but it's like there has to be more than just putting them into groups. There needs to be, and I don't know how I feel about the whole every kid has a role. You're the timer, you're this, you're that. I would like it to be more organic and authentic conversations. So that's what I think for right now. That's what we're only looking first 3 chapters.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, cool.
So I like that.
Awesome. You guys at all? All right. I'm super interested in seeing, like was said earlier, what's happening in our whole district. How our small group here can start to move things in your teams and in the whole schools, and to see students thinking. I don't know if that's possible, because you're
Instead of studenting.
Right. So that's it. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for you guys being here. And then we will schedule our next meeting, and then we'll meet next time, chapters 1 through 3. All right. Thank you.